Everyone assumed the silence meant something was wrong. But a new report has completely changed the way people are looking at the situation between Lamar Jackson and the Ravens. As more and more fans started talking about stalled contract negotiations and even questioning whether Baltimore's franchise quarterback had a long-term future with the team, one of the most trusted insiders covering the Ravens pulled back the curtain and shared details that could completely change the narrative. Now, the big question is this. Is there actually a reason to be worried, or are fans creating a crisis that doesn't really exist? Because what was just revealed about Lamar, the Ravens' strategy, and the real timeline of these negotiations might surprise a lot of people. And there's one key detail that explains why so much silence has turned into so many rumors. If you've been following everything happening in Baltimore, you've probably noticed that Lamar Jackson's contract extension has once again become one of the biggest stories surrounding the team. The moment reports came out saying the two sides weren't close to reaching an agreement, people immediately started assuming the worst. Suddenly, theories started spreading that the Ravens and Lamar were heading toward another contract standoff, and some even wondered if a split was quietly taking shape behind the scenes. Personally, I think a lot of people jumped to that conclusion way too quickly without having enough information. That's exactly why Jeff Zrebiec decided to step in and provide some much-needed context. And here's what he had to say. Contract negotiations between Jackson and the team were extremely difficult the first time around. People remember that they know Jackson and the team didn't always appear to be on the same page during parts of last season, and they naturally assume that's carrying over into these negotiations. That statement tells you a lot. Most of the concern isn't coming from what's actually happening today. It's coming from what people remember happening a few years ago. Zrebiec also pointed to a second reason, and honestly, I think this one carries even more weight. He said, neither Jackson nor his extremely tight inner circle leaks anything to the media, and the team is also extremely protective of anything involving Jackson out of respect for him. Outsiders interpret that silence as a sign that negotiations aren't going anywhere and that a breakup is inevitable. To be clear, I'm not suggesting that's happening. I just think that's why the speculation becomes so rampant. To me, that last part is easily the most important quote from the entire interview because it completely challenges the idea that silence automatically means there's a problem. I've always tried to separate rumors from actual information, and I think that's exactly what we need to do here. When you're talking about a quarterback like Lamar Jackson, even a few quiet days can turn into national headlines. But silence doesn't automatically equal conflict, and the most plugged-in Ravens insider is making that point very clear. That said, there's still one major factor from the past that's shaping the way everyone views these negotiations today. And once you look back at what happened in 2023, the entire situation starts to make a lot more sense. To really understand why the situation in Baltimore keeps raising so much concern, you can't ignore what happened back in 2023. That contract negotiation was one of the longest and most dramatic storylines in the entire NFL. For months, nobody really knew what was going to happen with Lamar Jackson's future. There were moments where the relationship between the player and the organization looked extremely tense, and that uncertainty completely took over the fan base. Personally, I think that memory is exactly why every new negotiation now feels way bigger than it actually is. The most defining moment of that entire saga came when Lamar himself shocked everyone by publicly revealing that he had requested a trade. In that instant, a lot of people genuinely believe his time in Baltimore was over. But what happened next completely flipped the story. After all the tension, both sides eventually came to an agreement, and Lamar signed a 5-year deal reportedly worth up to $260 million, with around $185 million guaranteed. So in the end, what looked like a breaking point turned into a deal where both sides walked away satisfied. Since then, a lot has changed inside the organization. Lamar has looked comfortable throughout the most recent offseason program, especially working alongside new head coach Jesse Minter and offensive coordinator Declan Doyle. That part of the story often gets overlooked when these rumors resurface. It's easy for people to only remember the conflict and forget that there was also a rebuilding phase after that deal got done and things started settling down again. That's why I honestly think it's dangerous to treat 2023 like a script that's automatically repeating itself in 2026. Of course, That situation shaped how everyone sees Lamar's negotiations today, and ignoring it will be naive. But the context is different now. Lamar is in a different stage of his career, and the organization itself is operating under a different reality. Still, there's one factor that might explain why this extension hasn't moved as quickly as some expected, and it has everything to do with how Lamar might be approaching his next deal. There's one key detail that completely changes how you look at this entire negotiation. Earlier this week, there was an indication that Lamar Jackson simply might not be in any rush to sign a new extension right now. And honestly, when you look at the NFL landscape, that idea actually makes a lot of sense. We're talking about a quarterback who knows exactly what he's worth and fully understands how the market for the most important position in football works. The logic here is pretty straightforward. Over the next few months, other quarterbacks around the league could also sign new deals. If one of them resets the market with an even bigger contract, that immediately raises the value of the position as a whole. That would put Lamar in an even stronger position when he eventually decides to sit down with the Ravens and finalize his own extension. This wouldn't be about conflict with the team, but rather about timing the market in the most strategic way possible. Another important factor is that Lamar's current contract already gives him a very comfortable position. The deal in place prevents Baltimore from simply using the franchise tag in 2028 to control his rights, and any potential trade would require his approval. That alone significantly increases his leverage. In practice, there's no urgency forcing him to rush into a decision because his current situation already provides more security than most players in the league ever get. I see this as one of the most important parts of the entire story. A lot of people interpret the lack of an extension as a problem, but I see another possibility. Maybe Lamar is just playing a timing game to his advantage. If that's really the strategy, it makes perfect sense for him to wait and see how the quarterback market evolves before putting pen to paper. And while everyone tries to figure out what Lamar is thinking, there's someone inside the organization who keeps delivering the same message consistently since the beginning of these talks. Amid all the speculation, Jeff Zrebiec also addressed another question that started gaining traction among fans. Are the Ravens deliberately slowing things down in negotiations? According to the insider, that interpretation doesn't match what he sees inside the organization. Instead, the overall feeling is that Baltimore is still operating with the same priority it has always had when it comes to Lamar Jackson. Zrebiec was very direct when he said, "I wouldn't characterize this as the Ravens playing games." Owner Steve Bisciotti was very clear with Lamar Jackson about the team's desire to extend his contract. That statement matters because it shows that, from the perspective of someone who closely follows the team, there hasn't been any shift in the franchise's approach. Keeping Lamar remains the top priority. He also added another line that stood out. "I could absolutely be wrong, but I still get the sense that there's a general understanding between both sides about the timing of these contract talks, and the Ravens will be ready when and if Lamar is ready." Personally, I think this might be the most revealing quote of the entire update. It suggests that this isn't a power struggle over negotiations, but rather a mutual understanding of timing and patience. When you hear something like that, it becomes hard to believe the team is somehow stepping away from their franchise quarterback. We're talking about the face of the organization and one of the most talented players in the NFL. If the most trusted insider covering the Ravens continues to describe alignment between both sides, it feels premature to assume there's any kind of real crisis. The only real question left is when that understanding finally turns into an official signature.
If you're enjoying this breakdown, smash that like button to help the purple flock grow.
Even with all the attention the situation is getting, there's one important factor that can't be ignored. The calendar is still on their side. The Ravens training camp doesn't begin until late July, which means there's still a meaningful window for negotiations to progress without any immediate pressure. From the outside, it may feel urgent because of all the noise online, but in reality, the NFL timeline still allows plenty of room for a deal to get done. This also helps explain why there doesn't seem to be any panic inside the organization. The Ravens know they want Lamar Jackson for the long term. Lamar knows exactly how important he is to the franchise and understands his value across the league. When both sides share that level of clarity, It makes sense for negotiations to move carefully rather than rush toward a quick decision, especially when you're talking about a deal that could once again reshape the quarterback market. At the same time, it's impossible to ignore that every day without new information will continue fueling speculation. That's just how it works when you're dealing with one of the biggest stars in the NFL. One quiet week is enough for entirely new theories to surface about what's happening behind the scenes. And I think that pattern will repeat itself multiple times until something official finally gets done, simply because Lamar is a player who moved the entire league, and anything involving his contract immediately becomes national news. What it really feels like is that the biggest opponent in this negotiation might not be the side at all. It might just be the anxiety from everyone watching from the outside. Until there's an actual signature, the rumors aren't going anywhere. But based on everything Jeff Zrebiec laid out in the full context of the situation, there's still far more signs of patience and strategy than there are signs of any real breakup between Lamar Jackson and the Ravens. As we wrap this up, one thing becomes pretty clear. There's still far more speculation than actual concrete information when it comes to Lamar Jackson's extension. The silence around these negotiations opened the door for endless rumors. But based on what the Ravens insider laid out, there's no real indication that the relationship between both sides is falling apart. If anything, everything points to both the team and Lamar understanding exactly how big this moment is, and choosing to handle it with patience instead of pressure. Now it really comes down to timing. With training camp approaching, any small update could completely shift the direction of this story, whether that means negotiations suddenly speeding up or new details about Lamar's strategy coming to light. And as we've seen, when it comes to a quarterback like Lamar Jackson, it only takes one piece of news to completely change the entire narrative overnight. And I want to hear your take on this. Do you think Lamar Jackson gets this extension done before training camp starts, or is he really willing to wait for the quarterback market to rise even higher? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because I'm going through them and I want to see how you're reading this situation. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like. Subscribe for more Ravens updates, and I'll see you in the next one.
And if you're a true Ravens fan and love keeping up with everything happening around the team, don't leave this video without sharing it with a friend who's just as passionate. They're definitely going to enjoy this. See those videos on your screen right now? I picked the first one especially for you, and the other is recommended by YouTube. Go check them out, and I'll see you in the next video.